Have you ever been pushed so far, you became unrecognizable? Hillary was 5 months pregnant when her husband's mistress Isabel cornered her in a crowded cafe. In front of everyone, Isabel didn't just expose the affair. She ridiculed Hillary's pregnancy, calling her child a ball and chain. Caden, her beloved husband, stood by and did nothing. For months, Hillary swallowed the humiliation, playing the part of the forgiving wife. Everyone whispered about her weakness, her foolishness. But they didn't know her silence was not forgiveness. It was the calm before a storm she was planning to unleash on their wedding day. The scent of roasted coffee beans and buttery croissants usually comforted Hillary. But on that Tuesday morning it felt cloying, almost suffocating. At 5 months pregnant, her senses were a chaotic symphony, and the chic little cafe, the Daily Grind, a favorite spot for her and Caden, suddenly felt like a cage. She stirred her decaf latte, the tiny clink of the spoon against ceramic unnaturally loud in her ears. Caden was late. He'd been late a lot recently, his excuses ranging from late-night meetings to early morning conference calls with international clients. Hillary, trusting and deeply in love, had accepted them all. She traced the rim of her cup, her gaze falling on her swollen belly. A soft, protective smile touched her lips. This baby, their baby, was a tiny anchor in the increasingly turbulent sea of her life. They'd been so thrilled, Caden especially. He'd wept when she showed him the positive test, lifting her off her feet and spinning her around their sun-drenched living room. A family Hillary, he'd whispered against her hair. We're finally going to be a real family. That memory was her shield against the creeping anxieties. The bell above the cafe door chimed and Hillary looked up, expecting to see Caden's familiar, handsome face. Instead, a woman stood, silhouetted against the bright morning light. She was tall and slender, dressed in a sharp crimson pantsuit that seemed to command the attention of the entire room. Her platinum blonde hair was cut in a severe, stylish bob, and her crimson lips were curved into a smirk. Hillary had never seen her before yet. There was a chilling familiarity in her confident stride as she walked directly to her table. Hillary, the woman, said, her voice smooth as silk, but laced with venom. It wasn't a question. Hillary's hand instinctively went to her belly. I'm sorry. Do I know you? The woman laughed, a short, sharp sound devoid of humor. She pulled out a chair and sat down uninvited. No, but you know my boyfriend, Caden. The name hung in the air, thick and heavy. Hillary's world tilted. The background chatter of the cafe, the clatter of dishes, the hiss of the espresso machine. It all faded into a dull roar. I think you're mistaken, Hillary stammered, her heart beginning to pound a frantic, painful rhythm against her ribs. Caden is my husband. Husband, boyfriend, semantics, the woman purred, waving a dismissive hand. The point is, he's with me. I'm Isabel. She leaned forward, her blue eyes cold as ice chips raking over Hillary from head to toe. Her gaze lingered with theatrical disgust on Hillary's pregnant stomach. And you, my dear, are the obstacle. Hillary felt the blood drain from her face. This couldn't be happening. Not here, not now. She looked around, her eyes pleading for an escape, but the other patrons were now openly staring, their curiosity piqued by the unfolding drama. Caden and I have been together for over a year, Isabel continued, her voice rising just enough to carry. He was going to leave you. He was just waiting for the right time. But then you had to go and get yourself knocked up. She gestured at Hillary's belly with a flick of her wrist, a desperate, last-ditch effort to trap him. So pathetic. Tears welled in Hillary's eyes, hot and shameful. She wanted to scream, to deny it, to throw her lukewarm latte in this woman's smug face. But she was paralyzed, a trapped animal in the headlights of an oncoming train. "He doesn't love you." Isabel's voice was a cruel whisper now. "He loves me. He loves my ambition, my body, my life. He's bored of you, the quiet little homemaker. And this," she pointed again at Hilary's stomach, "this is just a ball and chain, a burden he never wanted." Each word was a physical blow, knocking the air from her lungs. She looked toward the door, a desperate prayer on her lips. "Caden, please come now. Tell her she's lying." As if summoned by her desperate wish, the bell chimed again. It was Caden. His face, usually a source of such comfort, was pale and etched with panic as he took in the scene. His eyes met Hilary's for a fleeting second, before flicking to Isabel. "Isabel, what are you doing here?" he hissed, rushing to the table. Isabel's smirk widened. "Just introducing myself to your wife." She said the word wife as if it were a disease. "We were just talking about the baby." Caden's face, a mask of controlled fury, turned to Hilary. She looked at him, her eyes begging for him to deny it, to defend her, to make this nightmare stop. But he said nothing. He just stood there, trapped between his two worlds. His silence, the most damning confession of all. It was in that silence that something inside Hilary broke. The part of her that had loved Caden unconditionally, the part that had believed in their forever, shattered into a million tiny, irreparable pieces. "You see," Isabel said, standing up. She smoothed down her already perfect suit. Her voice was now loud, triumphant, for the benefit of the entire cafe. "He doesn't want you. He doesn't want your baby. Why don't you just do everyone a favor and disappear?" With a final contemptuous look at Hilary, Isabel turned and walked away, her heels clicking a victorious rhythm on the polished floor. The cafe was silent. Every eye was on Hilary, her face streaked with tears, her body trembling. Caden finally moved, reaching for her hand. "Hilary, I can explain." She snatched her hand away, as if his touch were fire. She looked at his face, at the man she thought she knew, and saw a stranger. The humiliation was a physical weight pressing down on her, crushing her. She wanted to scream, to rage, to fall apart. But then a strange, cold calm washed over her. It was an instinct she didn't know she possessed. An icy resolve that froze her tears and straightened her spine. She would not give them the satisfaction of a public breakdown. She would not be the hysterical, pregnant wife. Slowly, deliberately, Hilary pushed her chair back and stood up. She didn't look at Caden. She couldn't. She walked out of their cafe, her head held high, each step an act of defiance. She could feel the stares of everyone inside, could feel Caden's desperate gaze on her back. She walked for blocks, not knowing or caring where she was going. The city noise was a blur, the faces of passers-by meaningless. The only thing that was real was the cold, hard knot in her chest and the tiny life inside her. The humiliation had been public, the betrayal devastating. But her revenge, she decided in that moment, would be silent. It would be patient. It would be a masterpiece of her own making. Caden and Isabel wanted her to disappear. Oh, she would. The Hilary they knew, the quiet, forgiving wife, had died in that cafe. A new Hilary was born in her place. And she would wait. She would play her part. She would let them think they had won. Until the perfect moment. until a day that was supposed to be a celebration of love and commitment. Until their wedding day. The days that followed the cafe incident were a masterclass in deception. Hillary returned home to find a frantic Caden pacing their living room. He launched into a prepared speech, a torrent of apologies and justifications. Isabel was unstable, obsessed, a mistake from a past he was trying to escape. He'd been trying to end it for months, he claimed, but she was manipulative, threatening. "I love you, Hillary," he'd said, his eyes welling with tears that Hillary now recognized as performance. "You and our baby are my world. Please, you have to believe me." The old Hillary would have. The old Hillary would have crumpled into his arms, desperate to believe the lies, because the truth was too painful to bear. But the woman who had walked out of that cafe was different. She looked at him, at his earnest, pleading face, and felt nothing but a chilling emptiness. The love had been hollowed out, leaving behind a vast, cold cavern. Yet she nodded. She let him hold her. She whispered, "I forgive you, Caden." The relief that washed over his face was so profound, it was almost comical. He thought it was over. He thought he had dodged the bullet. He didn't realize he had just handed her the gun. Hillary's forgiveness was her camouflage. It allowed her to remain in the house in his life, the perfect vantage point from which to orchestrate her revenge. She played the part of the wounded but devoted wife, her pregnancy, her shield, and her excuse. When she was quiet, it was the hormones. When she was distant, it was her anxiety about the baby. Caden, consumed by his own guilt and relief, bought every act. Her first move was subtle. Hillary had always managed their finances. Caden, who worked in high-stakes corporate acquisitions, earned a significant income, but he had little interest in the day-to-day management of their wealth. With meticulous care, Hillary began to untangle their joint assets. She opened a new bank account in her name, only a secret sanctuary for her growing war chest. She started small, redirecting, small, seemingly insignificant amounts from their joint accounts. A little from the grocery budget here, a little from the discretionary spending there. Caden never noticed. She enlisted the help of an old college friend, a forensic accountant named David Chen. Over a hushed phone call, she laid out a heavily edited version of her situation, framing it as a precautionary measure. "I just want to be prepared," she'd said, the lie tasting like ash in her mouth. "With the baby coming, I need to understand our financial landscape completely." David, a kind and pragmatic man, agreed without question. He began a discreet audit of Caden's business dealings, his personal accounts, everything. "Give me a few weeks, Hillary," he'd said. "If there's anything to find, I'll find it." While David dug into the numbers, Hillary focused on Caden. She became the perfect wife, attentive and caring. She cooked his favorite meals, listened patiently to his stories about work, and rubbed his shoulders when he came home late, feigning exhaustion from another deal. All the while she was gathering intelligence. She paid attention to the names he mentioned, the locations of his meetings, the nervous way he guarded his phone. One evening as he slept, she carefully lifted his phone from the nightstand. Her hands trembled not with fear, but with a cold, electrifying rage. She had never violated his privacy before, but the rules had changed. She didn't know his passcode, but she didn't need to. She used his sleeping face to unlock it with facial recognition. Her heart hammered against her ribs as she opened his messages. And there it was, a thread with Isabel. Hundreds of messages, sexts, promises, declarations of love. But there was more. They weren't just lovers. They were partners in crime. The messages revealed a scheme far more sinister than a simple affair. Caden was embezzling from his company. He was using a series of shell corporations created with Isabel's legal expertise to siphon funds from a major acquisition deal he was overseeing. The deal worth hundreds of millions was his ticket to a new life. A life with Isabel, far away from his pregnant wife. Hilary's breath hitched. This wasn't just about a broken heart anymore. This was criminal. She scrolled frantically, taking screenshots of everything. The incriminating messages, the bank transfer confirmations, the names of the shell companies. She sent them to a new encrypted email account she had created, then meticulously deleted the evidence of her snooping from his phone. As she placed the phone back on the nightstand, she looked at the man sleeping beside her. His face, so handsome and familiar, was now the face of a monster. The betrayal was deeper, darker than she could have ever imagined. He wasn't just cheating on her. He was a thief, a liar, a man willing to destroy countless lives for his own selfish gain. A few days later, Caden came home with a velvet box. He got down on one knee in the middle of their living room, the same spot where he had celebrated her pregnancy. "Hilary," he began, his voice thick with rehearsed emotion. "These last few weeks have been hell. I almost lost you, and it made me realize I can't live without you. I know we're already married, but I want to do it right. I want to stand up in front of all our friends and family and show them that you are my world. Let's renew our vows. Let's have a real wedding, a celebration of our family." Inside the box was a stunning diamond ring, larger and more extravagant than her original engagement ring. Hilary knew with sickening certainty that it had been purchased with stolen money. It was a bribe, a beautiful, sparkling lie. Her mind raced. A wedding, a public declaration of his love and commitment. The irony was so thick it was almost poetic. It was the perfect stage, the perfect audience, the perfect trap. A slow smile spread across her face, the first genuine smile she had felt in weeks. It was a cold, sharp smile that didn't reach her eyes. She looked at Caden on his knees before her and saw him for what he was, a fool. "Oh, Caden," she whispered, her voice a perfect imitation of joyful surprise. "It's beautiful. Yes. Yes, I'll marry you again." As he slid the ring onto her finger, she made a silent promise. Not to him, but to herself and to the child growing inside her. She would have her wedding day, and on that day, she would not be the victim. She would be the victor. The entire world Caden and Isabel had built on their lies would come crashing down around them, and she would be the one to light the match. The wedding planning began with a fervor that surprised everyone. Hilary, the woman who had always preferred quiet evenings to lavish parties, threw herself into the role of the blushing bride-to-be with an actress's dedication. She was the picture of excitement, her days a whirlwind of cake tastings, venue tours, and dress fittings. Caden, seeing her so animated, was convinced his grand gesture had worked. He saw her enthusiasm as proof of her forgiveness, a sign that his carefully constructed world was safe. But beneath the surface of tulle and floral arrangements, a different kind of plan was taking shape. Hilary's every decision was a calculated move, a piece being carefully placed on a chessboard only she could see. The venue she chose was the Grand Majestic Hotel, a place renowned for its opulence and, more importantly, its state-of-the-art audio-visual system. During the tour, while Caden was schmoozing with the hotel manager, Hilary had a quiet word with the tech supervisor. She feigned a charming ignorance, asking about slideshows and video presentations. A surprise for Caden, she'd confided with a wink. A little trip down memory lane. The supervisor, a helpful young man named Ben, was more than happy to show her the ropes explaining how to connect a personal device to the main ballroom's massive projector screens. She filed the information away, a key piece of her arsenal. Her wedding dress was another strategic choice. She eschewed the trendy, form-fitting gowns, opting for a custom-made empire waist dress. It was elegant and timeless, but its primary function was to comfortably conceal a small, high-fidelity recording device. She'd spent hours online researching spy equipment until she found the perfect one. Tiny with a long battery life and crystal-clear audio reception. She would wear it to every meeting, every conversation with Caden, a silent, unseen witness. The guest list was her next masterpiece of manipulation. She insisted on inviting everyone. "I want the world to see how much we love each other." Caden, she'd gushed. She made sure to include Caden's boss, the CEO of his company, Mr. Harrison, a man known for his rigid principles and zero tolerance for corporate malfeasance. She invited Caden's parents, who adored her, and had been heartbroken by whispers of his indiscretion. And in a move of pure audacious genius, she insisted on inviting Isabel. Caden had balked at that. Hillary, no. "That's insane." Hillary had looked at him, her eyes wide and full of a manufactured grace. "I've forgiven you, Caden. And if I've forgiven you, I have to forgive her too. It's the only way to truly move on." Besides, she added a hint of steel in her voice, "don't you think it will look suspicious if she's not there? People talk. This way we show them that it's all in the past, that we are united and strong." Her logic was flawless, her performance impeccable. Caden, trapped by his own narrative of a forgiven husband, had no choice but to agree. He watched her, a flicker of awe and unease in his eyes. He was beginning to see a strength in her he hadn't noticed before, but he mistook it for resilience, not retribution. Meanwhile, her alliance with David Chen was bearing fruit. The forensic accountant had unearthed a labyrinth of deceit. Caden and Isabel hadn't just embezzled money. They had systematically defrauded the company for over 18 months. They had set up shell corporations in offshore accounts, laundered money through fake invoices, and stolen intellectual property from the company Caden was supposed to be acquiring. The scale of the fraud was breathtaking, far larger than Hillary had initially realized from the text messages. David, his voice grim over the phone, laid it all out. "Hillary, this is serious. We're talking about grand larceny wire fraud. They could face years in prison." He paused. "I have everything documented. Bank statements, wire transfers, incorporation documents. It's a watertight case." "We should go to the authorities." "Not yet." Hillary said, her voice steady. "I need you to do one more thing for me. Can you put all of this into a presentation? A slideshow. Simple, clear, with an undeniable timeline. Something anyone can understand." There was a long silence on the other end of the line. David was a man of numbers and rules. This was unorthodox, but he had known Hillary for years, and he could hear the unbreakable resolve in her voice. "Okay, Hillary," he finally said. "I'll get it done." The emotional toll of her double life was immense. There were days she would lock herself in the bathroom, her hand pressed against her mouth to stifle the sobs, the sheer weight of her rage and grief threatening to overwhelm her. She would look at her reflection, at the dark circles under her eyes, at the burgeoning life in her womb, and wonder if she had the strength to see it through. But then she would feel a gentle kick from her baby, a tiny, insistent reminder of what she was fighting for. This wasn't just for her. It was for her child, to ensure they would never be tied to a man like Caden, to a life built on a foundation of lies. One afternoon, Isabel, emboldened by her invitation to the wedding, cornered Hilary in the parking lot of a prenatal yoga studio. "I have to hand it to you," Isabel said, leaning against her sleek sports car. "I didn't think you had it in you. Playing the forgiving wife, letting him throw this ridiculous party. You're a better actress than I thought." Hilary smiled, a serene, placid expression she had perfected. Her hand rested on her belly, where the tiny recording device was safely nestled in a custom-sewn pocket. "I'm not acting, Isabel. I'm just trying to keep my family together." Isabel laughed. "Family? You, him, and that thing Caden is mine. This wedding, this is just a show, a final goodbye to his old life before he starts his new one with me, with our money." Her eyes glinted with triumph. "Did you really think he was going to stay with you? We're closing the deal next month. After the wedding, we're gone. A new life in the Caymans. And you'll be left with nothing." Hilary's smile didn't waver. "Thank you for telling me, Isabel." Isabel frowned, thrown off by her calm acceptance. "You're not even going to fight?" "There's no need to fight," Hilary said softly, turning to walk away. "The truth has a way of coming out." As she got into her car, her hands were shaking, but her heart was steady. She had it, the final piece of the puzzle, a recorded confession filled with hubris and contempt. It was more than she could have ever hoped for. The wedding was 2 weeks away. The invitations were sent, the flowers were ordered, the stage was set. Hilary, the unseen architect of it all, was ready. The world saw a pregnant woman glowing with love. But under the silk and lace, she was a warrior armed with evidence, patience, and a promise of retribution that was about to be spectacularly fulfilled. The week before the wedding was a blur of final preparations, each moment thick with a palpable humming tension. To the outside world, it was the joyful chaos preceding a grand celebration. For Hilary, it was the final nerve-wracking countdown to a detonation she herself had engineered. Her composure was a thin sheet of ice over a raging sea, and she feared that at any moment it might crack. Caden was at his most charming, the doting fiancé. He was attentive, almost smothering his every gesture, a performance for their friends and family. He seemed to have fully convinced himself of his own fiction, that this wedding was a new beginning, a testament to his love and Hilary's boundless capacity for forgiveness. He was so caught up in the romance of it all that he failed to see the chilling emptiness in his bride's eyes. 2 days before the wedding, Hilary's parents arrived. Her mother, Carol, a woman with sharp intuition, pulled her aside in the kitchen. "Are you truly happy, sweetheart?" she asked, her hand gently touching Hilary's cheek. "You seem distant." Hilary forced a bright smile. "I'm just tired, Mum, and overwhelmed. Planning a wedding while pregnant is a lot." She felt a pang of guilt for deceiving her own mother, but her resolve held firm. The truth, when it came, had to come all at once, a cleansing fire. A partial reveal would only lead to attempts at reconciliation, to pleas for her to reconsider. She couldn't risk that. The cancer of Caden's deceit had to be cut out completely. The day of the rehearsal dinner was the true test of her nerve. It was held in a private room at an upscale restaurant, the very picture of sophisticated celebration. Caden's parents were there beaming with pride. His boss, Mr. Harrison, gave a toast to Caden's impeccable character and bright future. Hilary sat beside Caden, smiling, nodding her hand in his, a perfect portrait of bridal bliss. And across the table, Isabel watched her with a mixture of pity and contempt. She had come as the plus one of a mutual acquaintance, a move of breathtaking arrogance. She raised her champagne glass to Hilary in a silent, mocking toast. "You may have the wedding," her eyes seemed to say, "but I'll have the man and the money." Hilary met her gaze and gave a small, almost imperceptible nod. "Enjoy the show." That night, sleep was impossible. Hilary lay in their bed, feeling the weight of Caden's arm draped over her. His steady breathing, a sound she had once found comforting but which now sounded menacing. The recording of Isabel's confession was on a USB drive tucked safely in her jewelry box. David's presentation, a damning indictment of Caden's crimes, was on the same drive. Everything was in place. She slipped out of bed in the pre-dawn hours of her wedding day and went to the nursery. The room was painted a soft, gentle yellow. A crib stood assembled in the corner, a mobile of tiny, smiling stars hanging above it. She ran her hand over the smooth wood of the crib, her heart aching with a fierce, protective love. "I'm doing this for you, little one," she whispered into the quiet room, "so you can be born into a world of truth." The morning of the wedding dawned bright and clear, a perfect autumn day. The Grand Majestic Hotel was buzzing with activity. Florists arranged cascades of white roses and lilies. Waitstaff polished silverware to a brilliant shine. Hilary moved through it all in a dreamlike state, her focus narrowed to a single point. Her bridesmaids, oblivious, chattered excitedly as they helped her into her gown. "You're the calmest bride I've ever seen her maid of honor," Sarah commented, fluffing the train of her dress. "I'm just ready." Hilary replied, her words carrying a double meaning only she understood. As the hairstylist put the finishing touches on her elegant updo, she discreetly retrieved the USB drive. She slipped it into the tiny hidden pocket inside her dress, the small hard rectangle a reassuring weight against her skin. The moment came. The string quartet in the grand ballroom began to play Pachelbel's Canon. The heavy wooden doors opened, and Hilary on her father's arm began her long walk down the aisle. The ballroom was filled to capacity. Every face was turned towards her. She saw her mother dabbing her eyes with a handkerchief. She saw Caden's business partners, his friends, their entire shared history represented in that room. Her gaze swept over them all, a silent apology and a warning. And then she saw him. Caden standing at the altar, looking impossibly handsome in his tailored tuxedo. His face was alight with a triumphant smile. He saw her, his beautiful, forgiving, pregnant wife, coming toward him to solidify his victory, to cleanse him of his sins in a public display of devotion. He looked like a man who had gotten away with everything. And in the third row, seated next to Mr. Harrison, was Isabel. She wore a dress of shimmering gold, a stark and deliberate contrast to the bridal white. She caught Hilary's eye and gave a subtle, confident smirk. Hilary's steps were steady, her expression serene. Her father squeezed her arm. "Ready, my girl," he whispered. "I am," she said, her voice clear and strong. She reached the altar and took Caden's hands. They felt cold, clammy. The officiant began to speak, his voice echoing through the silent, expectant room. "We are gathered here today to celebrate the renewal of vows between Caden and Hilary, a testament to enduring love." Hilary looked into Caden's eyes, and for the first time that day, she let him see. She dropped the mask of the serene bride, and for just a second, she allowed the icy resolve, the cold, hard fury she had harbored for months to surface. A flicker of confusion, of alarm, crossed his face. He saw something in her eyes he didn't recognize, something that made his triumphant smile falter. He opened his mouth to whisper, "What is it?" But it was too late. The officiant had reached the pivotal moment. Do you, Caden, take Hilary to be your lawfully wedded wife, to have and to hold in sickness and in health for as long as you both shall live? All eyes were on him. He hesitated for only a fraction of a second, unsettled by the look in her eyes, before his bravado returned. I do, he said, his voice booming with confidence. Then the officiant turned to her. And do you, Hilary? Hilary held up a hand, a small, simple gesture that brought the entire ceremony to a halt. A collective gasp rippled through the room. Before I answer, she said, her voice resonating with a calm authority that captivated every person in the room. There's something I'd like to share with you all. A little trip down memory lane, as a tribute to my loving husband. She turned to face the stunned guests, her gaze sweeping over them until it landed on Ben, the tech supervisor who stood near the back of the room. She gave him a small, prearranged nod. Caden's face was a canvas of confusion and dawning horror. Hilary, what are you doing? He hissed, his grip on her hand tightening. She pulled her hand free. Just being an honest woman. Caden, she said softly, and then the two massive projector screens on either side of the altar. The screens that were supposed to be showing a romantic photo montage flickered to life, not with pictures of their life together, but with the cold, hard text of a bank statement from a shell corporation in the Cayman Islands. The storm had arrived. The ballroom fell into a stunned, absolute silence. The only sound was the soft, romantic melody of the string quartet, which, sensing the abrupt shift in atmosphere, faltered for a moment before trailing off into a confused, discordant screech of strings. On the two massive projector screens flanking the altar, the name Isabelle Dubois was clearly visible next to Caden's as a joint account holder on a statement from a bank in the Cayman Islands. A collective sharp intake of breath, like a reverse wind, swept through the hundreds of assembled guests. Caden stared at the screen, his face draining of all color so rapidly he looked like a marble statue. He looked as if he'd been physically struck, his body swaying slightly. Hilary! Stop this! He choked out. His voice, a strangled, desperate whisper that was lost in the cavernous silence. Turn it off. Now. Hilary didn't even grant him a glance. She turned from the altar and took a small wireless microphone from the officiant's lectern, her movements unnervingly calm and deliberate. As I said, she addressed the captivated audience, her amplified voice resonating with a chilling clarity through the grand hall, a tribute to my husband, a man of many talents and many partners. Her gaze flickered for a second to Isabel, who sat frozen in the third row, her face a mask of horror. Then Hilary's eyes found Mr. Harrison. Caden's boss, a man of immense power and influence, was staring at the screen with a dawning, dangerous comprehension. The benevolent paternal smile he'd worn moments before had vanished, replaced by the cold, calculating look of a predator who has just realized a fox is in his henhouse. Hilary clicked a small remote she held in her hand. The screen changed. It now showed an image of a text message conversation, the one she had photographed from Caden's phone months ago, blown up to an undeniable size. Isabel. Did you transfer the final amount? The Harrison deal closes next week. We need to be ready to fly. Caden. Done. Another $250K is in the account. He suspects nothing. He's too busy praising my impeccable character. A low, guttural sound escaped Mr. Harrison's throat. A wave of murmurs rippled through the crowd as they read and reread the damning words. Friends who had clapped Caden on the back just an hour before now stared at him with contempt. "Hillary, please," Caden begged, finally finding his voice and taking a clumsy step toward her. His carefully constructed composure had completely shattered. "Don't do this. We can talk about this. Later. In private." In private, Hillary's laugh was short and devoid of humor. "You mean like the way you and Isabel have been privately embezzling from your own company for the last 18 months? She turned back to the audience. "Please, what, Caden? Please don't show our friends and family the man you really are, the man who stood by and watched as his mistress called his unborn child a ball and chain." A horrified gasp came from the front row where Caden's mother sat, her hand flying to her mouth. Hillary clicked the remote again. The slideshow David had so expertly prepared began to play. It was a masterpiece of cold, hard facts, a systematic demolition of a man's life. It showed the labyrinthine web of shell corporations, the meticulously falsified invoices, the wire transfers to offshore accounts. It detailed the intellectual property they had stolen. Each slide was another nail being hammered into Caden's professional and personal coffin. The guests were no longer just watching a drama. They were witnesses to the presentation of a federal case. Whispers turned into shocked exclamations. Caden's father, a man respected in the community, had buried his face in his hands, his shoulders shaking with shame. Then came the centerpiece of her presentation. Hillary's voice filled the room, but this time it was from a recording. It was the conversation she'd had with Isabel in the parking lot. Her voice calm and measured, a stark contrast to Isabel's smug, contemptuous tone, which now echoed through the silent hall. "Caden is mine. This wedding, this is just a show. After the wedding, we're gone. A new life in the Caymans. And you'll be left with nothing." If the slideshow was a series of body blows, the audio was a dagger to the heart. Every eye in the room swiveled from the screens to the woman in the shimmering gold dress. Isabel looked like a trapped animal, her face pale and streaked with mascara. She half rose from her seat, a primal urge to flee taking over. But Mr. Harrison, sitting beside her, put a firm hand on her arm, his grip like iron. He wasn't letting her go anywhere. The recording ended. Silence descended once more, thick, pregnant, and suffocating. Hillary finally turned to face Caden fully. He was trembling violently, his handsome face contorted into an ugly grimace of terror and pure, undiluted rage. You planned this," he stammered, spitting the words. "You're insane." "No, Caden," she said, her voice dropping to an intimate conversational level that was somehow more terrifying than a shout. "I'm not insane. I'm just thorough. You asked me to take you in sickness and in health. You just forgot to mention fraud and theft." She took a step closer, her eyes locking with his. "You thought I was weak. You thought I was a fool who would cry in a corner. You and she underestimated me. You saw a quiet wife, not a woman who would burn your entire world to the ground to protect her child from the poison of your legacy." She looked out at the sea of shocked faces. "I'm sorry to have ruined this celebration," she said, her voice ringing with a strange sincerity. "But this was never a celebration of love. It was the scene of a crime. And these," she gestured to the damning evidence still glowing on the screens, "are the receipts." She let the microphone drop from her hand. It hit the floor with a loud, percussive thud that echoed the final definitive end of her marriage and his life as he knew it. Chaos erupted. Mr. Harrison was on his feet, his phone all ready to his ear, his voice sharp and commanding, as he barked orders to what was undoubtedly his legal team and security. Caden's mother let out a grief-stricken wail. But Hillary's focus was singular. She looked past Caden to Isabel, who was now weeping openly, her facade of superiority utterly destroyed. Their eyes met for a final time across the ruined ballroom. There was no triumph in Hillary's gaze, only a vast, empty finality. She had not done this for pleasure. She had done this for justice. She turned her back on the wreckage. She didn't want to see his downfall, his arrest, the fallout of his greed. She had exposed the truth. The consequences were for others to deliver. Her father was by her side instantly, his arm wrapping around her shoulders, a solid, grounding presence. "I am so proud of you," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. Together they walked back down the aisle, away from the altar, away from the gasps and the shouting. They walked past the stunned guests who parted for them like the Red Sea. Hillary didn't look at any of them. Her head was held high, her steps unwavering, a queen leaving a battlefield of her own making. As she reached the heavy doors of the ballroom, she took one last look back. She saw Caden on his knees, his head in his hands, a pathetic broken figure in the center of the ruins of his own making, a king with a shattered crown. Hillary felt nothing. Not hatred, not pity, not even satisfaction. Just release. The cold knot of rage and grief that she had carried for months finally blessedly dissolved. She was free. And as she stepped out of the ballroom and into the bright, clear light of day, she placed a hand on her belly and felt a gentle, reassuring kick. Her new life, a life built on truth and strength, had just begun. The immediate aftermath of the wedding was a media deluge of biblical proportions. The story was simply too sensational to ignore the beautiful, pregnant, scorned wife who single-handedly exposed a multi-million-dollar corporate fraud scheme at the altar. It was the lead story on every news channel, the banner headline on every website. News vans like vultures camped outside the Grand Majestic Hotel for days. Bloggers and armchair psychologists dissected every available detail, painting Hillary in broad, dramatic strokes. She was either a cold, calculating mastermind, a modern-day Medea, or a feminist icon, a symbol of righteous fury. She ignored it all, a feat made possible by the protective wall her parents immediately erected around her. While the world feasted on the drama, Hillary retreated into a quiet cocoon. Her parents whisked her away to their peaceful suburban home, a sanctuary buffered from the relentless noise. Her father fielded calls from reporters with a curt, "No comment," while her mother brewed herbal tea and ensured she rested. One evening, a news report flashed on the television. A grainy photo of her on the altar, juxtaposed with mugshots of a disheveled Caden and a tear-streaked Isabel. Her father calmly picked up the remote and turned the screen to black. "We're not watching that filth," he said, his voice gentle but firm. "The past is the past. We only look forward now." Mr. Harrison, true to his formidable character, had acted with the swift and ruthless efficiency of a predator. Caden and Isabel were arrested before they could even process the full scope of their public ruin. Their bail was denied. The evidence Hillary had provided was so comprehensive, so irrefutably damning, that the district attorney's office fast-tracked the case. They faced a litany of federal charges, their fantasy of a new life in the Caymans, replaced with the stark, terrifying prospect of a long, bleak future in separate federal prisons. Hillary's only official involvement was giving a single detailed statement to a pair of stone-faced FBI agents in her parents' dining room. She laid out the facts calmly and objectively. her voice never wavering, and handed over the USB drive that had detonated her old life. And then she was done. She refused to speak to the press, declined lucrative offers for tell-all interviews and book deals, and let the legal system run its methodical course. Her war was over. Her part was played. Now it was time to build the peace. The months that followed were quiet, gentle, and profoundly restorative. She finalized her divorce from Caden, the proceedings laughably simple, given the circumstances. He didn't contest a thing. He had nothing left to fight with. She officially reclaimed her maiden name, an act that felt like shedding a heavy, soiled coat. The money she had secretly siphoned away, which she had thought of as her war chest, she now saw as a nest egg. It wasn't a fortune, but it was enough. It was a start. Most importantly, it was hers untainted by his crimes. The rest of their joint assets were frozen and eventually seized as part of the criminal investigation earmarked for restitution to the company Caden had defrauded. Hillary wanted none of it. It was blood money, and she was washing her hands clean. 4 months after the wedding that wasn't on a crisp winter morning, Hillary gave birth to a healthy, beautiful baby girl. She named her Hope. Holding her daughter for the first time, a tiny, warm bundle against her chest, Hillary felt a profound sense of peace she hadn't known was possible. All the anger, the pain, the bitterness she had harbored for months, it all melted away in the face of this tiny, perfect miracle. Hope was her future, her real new beginning. With her daughter in her arms, she found the courage to move forward. She bought a small, charming house with a garden in a quiet town a few hours away from the city, a place where no one knew her story, where she was just Hillary Hope's mom. She painted the nursery in shades of sunshine and lavender, and started a small business from her sun-drenched living room, using her sharp organizational skills to become a virtual assistant for other small business owners. It was a simple life, a peaceful life, a life built on her own terms, financed by her own hard work. She kept in touch with David Chen, who had become a true and loyal friend, a doting honorary uncle to Hope. He'd visit once a month, bearing gifts and praising Hillary for her courage. "You're the strongest person I know," he told her one afternoon, as they watched Hope take her first wobbly steps across the lawn. "You built a lifeboat while they were all celebrating on the Titanic. One day, nearly a year after the infamous wedding, a letter arrived with a prison postmark. It was from Caden. Her first instinct was to throw it into the fireplace. But curiosity, a final lingering echo of her past, made her open it. It was not an apology. It was 12 pages of self-pitying, rambling diatribe about how she had ruined his life, how they could have been happy if she had just kept her mouth shut, how he still inexplicably and delusionally thought he loved her. It was the letter of a terminal narcissist who had learned absolutely nothing from his spectacular fall from grace. Hillary read it without a flicker of emotion. The man who had written those words was a ghost, a stranger from a different lifetime whose problems no longer concerned her. She folded the letter neatly, put it in a fresh envelope, and added a single photograph of a smiling, vibrant Hope sitting in a field of daisies. She sent it back to him without a note. Let him see what he had truly lost. It was the only reply he would ever get. Hillary had been forged in the fire of betrayal and humiliation. She had walked through the flames and emerged not unscathed, but stronger, purer, tempered like steel. She had learned that forgiveness was not about absolving the perpetrator, but about freeing the victim. Her forgiveness for Caden wasn't about letting him off the hook. It was about letting go of the poison he had injected into her life, so that it could not touch her daughter. She had stayed silent, not out of weakness, but out of a strength she never knew she possessed. She had waited not for him to change, but for the perfect moment to reclaim her own life. She had been the humiliated wife, the silent victim, the avenging angel. But now she was simply Hillary, a mother, a business owner, a survivor. A woman who had faced the darkest parts of her life and had chosen to build a future filled with light. And as she watched her daughter chase butterflies in their sun-drenched backyard, her laughter like tiny bells on the breeze, Hillary knew with every fiber of her being that she was finally, truly, gloriously free. Hillary's story is a powerful reminder that the deepest wounds can forge the strongest warriors. She transformed her pain into power, her silence into a strategy, and her darkest moment into her greatest triumph. It's a testament to the incredible resilience of the human spirit and the fierce protective love of a mother. What would you have done in her position? Could you have maintained that level of control and patience for the ultimate payback? He was a Wall Street titan, a kingmaker who moved markets with a whisper. She was his beautiful, pregnant wife, the perfect ornament to his gilded life. But when billionaire Julian Croft woke up one morning and decided to freeze his wife Elara's bank accounts, leaving her penniless and trapped in their Fifth Avenue penthouse, he made a fatal mistake. He thought he was caging a songbird, but he had actually cornered a lioness. What he didn't know was that Elara's old money family hadn't just given her a dowry. They had given her a weapon. This is the story of how a woman with nothing but a secret phone call and a forgotten trust fund systematically dismantled a financial empire to save herself and her unborn child. The air in the penthouse was always the same, a sterile, climate-controlled 72 degrees, tinged with the faint, expensive scent of white tea and lilies that Julian Croft insisted upon. From their perch on the 80th floor, overlooking Central Park, New York City, was a silent, glittering tapestry. For Elara Croft, it was the most beautiful prison in the world. Her life to an outsider was a fantasy. At 28, she was married to Julian Croft, the 40-year-old enfant terrible of Wall Street. His firm, Croft Consolidated, was a leviathan swallowing smaller companies with a rapaciousness that the Financial Times called both terrifying and brilliant. Their life was a curated series of triumphs, galas at the Met summers, in their sprawling Hamptons estate, and impulsive trips to Milan for a weekend of shopping. Julian draped her in Graf diamonds and Hermès crocodile, not as gifts, but as branding. She was the Elara Croft, the flawless accessory to his monumental success. This morning, however, a secret joy warmed her, a feeling entirely her own. She sat on the edge of their vast, custom-made bed, the silk sheets pooling around her ankles. In her hand was a positive pregnancy test. 2 stark blue lines. A baby. Their baby. For months she had felt a creeping hollowness, a sense of being an exquisite ghost in her own life. But this was real. This was substance. She waited for Julian to finish his morning routine, a brutal session with his personal trainer, a cold plunge, and then 30 minutes of uninterrupted market analysis on a bank of 8 monitors in his home office. He emerged precisely at 7:30 a.m., knotting a silk tie from Charvet. He was handsome in a severe, sculpted way, his dark hair tinged with a distinguished grey at the temples. He didn't smile. He approved. "You're glowing," he stated, his eyes scanning her as if assessing a stock price. It wasn't a compliment. It was an observation of an asset's condition. "Julian, I have something to tell you." Elara said, her voice trembling slightly. She held out the test. He took it, his expression unreadable. He stared at the two blue lines for a long moment. Elara's heart hammered against her ribs. She had pictured this moment 1,000 times. Tears, a tender embrace, whispers of excitement. Julian's gaze lifted from the test and met hers. A strange proprietary light flickered in his eyes. "All right," he said, his tone the same as when he closed a multi-billion-dollar merger. "We'll need to make adjustments. The trip to Aspen is off. Your obstetrician will be Dr. Helen Chang at Mount Sinai. I'll have my assistant schedule a full workup. We'll convert the west wing of the Hamptons house into a nursery. I'll handle the designer." He hadn't said congratulations. He hadn't touched her. He had simply started issuing directives. The warmth inside her chilled. "I was thinking..." She began wanting to suggest her own childhood doctor, to talk about names to share the moment. Elara, he cut her off, his voice soft, but edged with steel. "I know what's best. We can't leave anything to chance now. This baby, it's a Croft. It's my legacy. Everything has to be perfect." He placed the test on the marble nightstand as if it were a finalized contract, gave her a perfunctory kiss on the forehead, and left for the office. The scent of his Tom Ford cologne lingered, suffocating her. The joy she had felt just minutes before curdled into a familiar dread. It wasn't their baby. It was his legacy. She was merely the vessel. The next 2 weeks were a blur of appointments Julian's office had scheduled. Nutritionists, wellness coaches, a consultation with Dr. Chang, where Julian did most of the talking, outlining the optimal prenatal strategy. He vetted and fired their chef for using non-organic kale. He installed a new air purification system. His control, always a suffocating blanket, was now a straitjacket. The breaking point came on a Tuesday. Elara was having lunch with her 2 friends, the only 2 from her pre-Julian life she was still allowed to see. She'd insisted on a small, discreet restaurant in Soho, away from the usual prying eyes of their social set. The bill came, and Elara, as she always did, handed the waiter her black Amex card. Julian insisted she use it. It was, he said, unlimited. The waiter returned his face a mask of embarrassment. "I'm so sorry, Mrs. Croft. It's been declined." A flush of heat crept up Elara's neck. "That's impossible. Could you try it again?" He did. Declined again. "It says the account holder has suspended the card." Her friends exchanged awkward glances. The humiliation was a physical blow. She fumbled in her purse for another card, a Visa debit card linked to her personal savings account, a small fund she'd had since college. Declined. A frantic cold sweat broke out on her skin. She excused herself to the restroom and tried to log into her mobile banking app. Access denied. Please contact your primary account holder. The primary account holder was Julian. He had frozen everything, every cent. He had cut her off completely without a word of warning. She stumbled back to the table, her face pale. One of her friends quietly paid the bill. The pity in her eyes was almost worse than the shame. When she got back to the penthouse, the silence was deafening. She waited for hours. Julian returned late, well after 11 p.m. He walked into the living room, loosening his tie, his face impassive. "Julian?" she said, her voice shaking with a mixture of rage and fear. "My cards were declined today." He didn't feign surprise. He simply placed his briefcase on the coffee table. "Yes. I had them suspended." You... What? Why? Without even telling me, Alara, you're pregnant. Now, he said, his tone infuriatingly calm, as if explaining a simple concept to a child. Your health and the health of my heir are my top priority. That means no more frivolous lunches, no more unauthorized trips, no more stress. From now on, anything you need, food, clothing, transport, will be arranged by my staff. You just need to ask. It's for your own good. It's safer this way. She stared at him, the full, horrifying reality of her situation crashing down on her. He hadn't just frozen her accounts. He had formalized her status as his property. She was a prisoner. Her world shrunk to the dimensions of this penthouse, her every need subject to his approval. She was pregnant, vulnerable, and utterly, totally dependent on a man who saw her not as a wife, but as an incubator. "You can't do this," she whispered, tears welling in her eyes. "I already have," he replied, turning toward his office. "It's all taken care of." As he walked away, a cold, hard fury began to replace her fear. He thought he had taken everything. He thought he had won. But Julian Croft, for all his market analysis and strategic genius, had made one colossal miscalculation. He knew all about Alara Croft, his trophy wife. But he knew nothing about Alara Vance, the granddaughter of Arthur Vance, a man who believed that true power was never seen until it was used. And in the back of a dusty safe in her childhood bedroom, 1,000 miles away, lay a set of documents her grandfather had given her years ago, a weapon forged in old money and secret clauses waiting for this exact moment. The first 24 hours were a masterclass in psychological warfare. Julian's control was absolute and suffocatingly polite. A new chef, approved by his nutritionist, prepared meals that were bland, virtuous, and served at precise times. If Alara wanted to leave the apartment, she had to give 12 hours' notice so that a driver and a security guard, ostensibly for her protection, could be arranged. Every request was filtered through Julian's ever-present personal assistant, a brisk woman named Cynthia, whose loyalty was clearly to the man who signed her 6-figure paycheck. Alara played the part he had assigned her. She was docile, defeated, and fragile. She stayed in bed late, picked at her food, and shed quiet tears where she knew the maids would see them. She let Julian believe he had broken her. Inside, however, the fear had crystallized into something cold, sharp, and diamond-hard resolve. Her baby would not be born into this cage. Her child would not be raised as a pawn in Julian Croft's dynastic ambitions. On the third night, she waited until the rhythmic, deep breathing from Julian's side of the bed told her he was asleep. Slipping out from under the heavy duvet, she crept into her dressing room, a vast space larger than most New York apartments. She closed the heavy oak door, the click of the latch deafeningly loud in the silence. She didn't turn on the lights. Kneeling, she ran her hand along the back of the walk-in closet, behind a row of couture gowns she hadn't worn in years. Her fingers found the nearly invisible seam of a wall safe. Julian knew about this safe. He'd had it installed. It held the Graf diamond necklace he'd given her for their first anniversary, and a few other ostentatious pieces. He knew the combination their wedding date. He checked it periodically. But what he didn't know was that Alara had paid the installer an extra $5,000 in cash, back when she had cash to build a smaller, secondary, biometric-locked compartment inside the main safe. She pressed her thumb against a hidden sensor. A tiny section of the velvet-lined wall popped open with a faint hiss. Inside was not jewelry, but a single worn leather folio and a cheap burner phone she had bought for cash 2 years ago and never used. She took them out, her hands trembling. She sat on the floor, the glow of the city filtering through the window, and opened the folio. The paper was thick, creamy, and embossed with the letterhead of a discreet, centuries-old law firm in Geneva, Switzerland, Fontaine and Chen. Inside were the founding documents of something called the Odysseus Trust. The memory washed over her. Her 21st birthday. It wasn't a lavish party. It was a quiet dinner with her grandfather, Arthur Vance. Arthur was old money, old industry, old everything. His family had made their fortune in shipping and logistics long before income tax was a certainty. He was a quiet, formidable man with pale blue eyes that saw everything. While her parents were dazzled by Julian's new money flash, Arthur had always been reserved, his approval conspicuously absent. That night he had slid the leather folio across the table. "This is for you, Elara," he'd said. "Not from me, but for me. It is a provision." "A trust fund?" she had asked naively. He'd given a rare, thin smile. "Of a sort. It is a silent partner. You will not touch it. You will not speak of it. You will, for all intents and purposes, forget it exists. The men who manage it at Fontaine and Chen are the sons of the men who worked for my father. Their loyalty is to the Vances, not to a balance sheet." She remembered flipping through the dense legal jargon. The trust had been seeded with a modest amount from his estate, but the portfolio was aggressive, global, and utterly opaque. She was the sole beneficiary. But it was one particular section, Article 3, Section 4b, that he had tapped with a long, bony finger. "Pay attention to this," he'd warned, his voice low. "This clause is your parachute, your sword, and your shield. It is triggered by a spousal act of financial coercion or bad faith. If any man-husband specifically uses financial control to imprison you, this clause activates. The trust is no longer a passive investment vehicle. It becomes an active agent on your behalf. It will be your bank, your army, and your lawyer." "But Elara," he had fixed her with his intense gaze, "you only pull this trigger once. It is not a warning shot. It is a declaration of war." At 21, blissfully single and idealistic, she had thought him eccentric, a relic of a bygone era of ruthless patriarchs and arranged marriages. Now, sitting on the cold floor of her dressing room, she realized her grandfather hadn't been eccentric. He had been prophetic. He had seen a potential for vulnerability in her that she had been blind to, and he had armed her for a battle she never knew she would have to fight. She powered on the burner phone. It took a moment to find a signal. Holding her breath, she dialed the international number for Fontaine and Chen, listed on the letterhead. It was 4 a.m. in New York, but a respectable 10 a.m. in Geneva. The phone was answered on the second ring. Fontaine and Chen, a crisp female voice, said in French. "I need to speak to Mr. Chen, Elara," said her own voice, a little rusty. "My name is Elara Vance. My client identifier is Odysseus." There was a pause. The name was a key, a code. "One moment, please." A few seconds later, a man's voice, calm and measured, came on the line. "This is Alistair Chen. To whom am I speaking?" "This is Elara Vance. Elara Croft now." There was another slight pause, the sound of keyboard clicks in the background. "Ah, Miss Vance. We have not had the pleasure. Your grandfather was a remarkable man. How may we be of service?" His English was perfect, with a faint British accent from years at Cambridge. Elara took a deep breath, the words catching in her throat. Mr. Chen, I need to invoke Article 3, Section 4B of the Odysseus Trust. The line went silent for a full 10 seconds. The only sound was the faint transatlantic hiss. Elara's heart pounded. Had she said it right? Did he understand? Finally, Chen's voice returned all traces of pleasantry, gone replaced by a tone of immense gravity and immediate focus. Understood, Miss Vance. The trigger event has occurred? Yes. My husband, Julian Croft, has seized all my financial assets. My bank accounts and credit lines are frozen. I am confined to my home under his direct control. I am pregnant and have no access to my own resources. More typing. Julian Croft of Croft Consolidated. We are aware of him. The portfolio has been monitoring his activities as a matter of course since your marriage. Elara was stunned. They had been watching Julian all along. The terms of the trust are now in effect. Chen continued, his voice sharp and efficient. First, your immediate liquidity. A courier will be dispatched to your location within 12 hours. You will be buzzed from the lobby under the name AV Deliveries. Be ready. The package will contain a debit card linked to a new non-extraditable account in Liechtenstein, seeded with an initial 100,000 euros. It will also contain a secure satellite phone and a laptop. They are untraceable. Use them and only them for all future communication with me. He spoke with such speed and precision that Elara could barely keep up. Second, he went on the active measures. The trust will now allocate a significant portion of its capital to a new directive, the systematic deleveraging and dismantling of Julian Croft's financial holdings. We will need your help. You have intimate access. We need information. Passwords, deal structures, private ledgers, vulnerabilities. Anything that is not public knowledge. Your husband values control above all else. We will use that against him. We will not attack him like a rival firm. We will dissolve his foundations like water seeping into stone. Elara felt a dizzying mix of terror and exhilaration. This was real. This was happening. How much is in the trust? She asked, her voice barely a whisper. There was a dry chuckle on the other end of the line. Miss Vance, your grandfather was a very wise investor, and it has been 7 years. Let's just say that the trust's current valuation is substantial. Substantial enough that if Mr. Croft were to know its full extent, he would be the one feeling trapped. What do you need me to do? For now, nothing. Continue to play the part of the broken wife. Be meek. Be docile. Let him underestimate you. That is your greatest advantage. Gather what information you can safely. Our team will begin its work immediately. We will be in touch via the secure phone. Do you understand? Yes, she said, her voice firm, a new strength flowing through her veins. I understand. Good. Welcome back, Miss Vance, Chen said. Let's get you out of your cage. She ended the call and sat in the darkness, the leather folio in her lap. Julian thought he was the master of the universe, a predator at the top of the food chain. He had no idea that a ghost from the past, a promise made to a young woman by her grandfather, had just marked him as prey. The game had changed, and Elara Croft, the prisoner, was now the architect of her husband's ruin. For the next 3 weeks, Elara lived a double life with a discipline that would have impressed a covert operative. Outwardly, she was the picture of resigned melancholy. She allowed the nurse Julian had hired to take her blood pressure. She ate the prescribed meals of steamed fish and quinoa. She feigned interest in the swatches of fabric for the nursery that Julian's designer presented. She was a ghost in her own home, drifting through the opulent rooms, her expression vacant. Julian, consumed by his own ego and the demands of his empire, saw only what he wanted to see, a problem contained, a variable controlled. Inwardly, Ilara was a whirlwind of focused activity. The package from AV Deliveries had arrived as promised. The doorman, accustomed to a constant stream of deliveries from every luxury brand in existence, hadn't batted an eye. Inside a nondescript Chanel box, a perfect piece of camouflage, were the tools of her new life. The sleek, heavy satellite phone, the anonymous black laptop, and the cool metal debit card from a bank in Vaduz. Her clandestine headquarters was the ensuite bathroom of a guest bedroom that was seldom used. It had a solid core door and a noisy ventilation fan that provided excellent cover. Each night after Julian was asleep, she would slip inside, turn on the fan and the shower for good measure, and boot up the secure laptop. Her first conversations with Alistair Chen were tutorials in corporate espionage. He was patient, precise, and utterly ruthless. Julian's entire empire is built on leverage and perception. Chen explained, his voice coming through the encrypted line with perfect clarity. He borrows heavily to finance acquisitions, using the inflated value of his current assets as collateral. The whole structure is a house of cards. If one key support is pulled, the entire thing will tremble. Our job is to find that support. Ilara's role was to provide the map. Years of being the silent wife at dinner parties, of half listening to Julian's arrogant monologues about his deals, had filled her head with a trove of information she never realized she possessed. He has a private server in his home office, she told Chen, picturing the sleek black tower humming behind a ventilated grate. He calls it the Citadel. He says it's more secure than the cloud. He backs everything up to it nightly. Does he have a password? He's too arrogant for a simple one. It's a sequence. He uses a small black fob that he keeps on his keychain. It generates a new alphanumeric code every 60 seconds. A two-factor authentication key. Difficult but not impossible. We would need the fob itself, Chen mused. Ilara's mind raced. Julian's keys. They were always with him, except for one time, when he swam. Every morning at 5:30 a.m., he swam laps in the building's private pool for exactly 30 minutes. He left his keys, his wallet, and his phone in a locker. The next morning, Ilara rose at 5:15. She put on her workout clothes and for the first time in months went down to the residents-only fitness center. Julian was already in the pool, a sleek machine cutting through the still water. She feigned a series of gentle pregnancy-approved stretches, her eyes locked on the men's locker room door. At 6:01 a.m., he emerged, his hair wet, a towel slung around his neck. He gave her a nod of approval. He liked that she was being proactive about her health, and disappeared back into the elevator. She waited a full minute, her heart hammering. Then she walked calmly into the men's locker room. It was empty. She found his locker number 8, his lucky number. It was secured with a simple combination lock. She smiled grimly. Julian believed complex problems required complex solutions. He would never imagine she knew the simple sentimental code he'd chosen the date of their first meeting. 10:14. The lock clicked open. There they were, his keys, his wallet. She unclipped the small black fob. Working quickly, she pressed it against a small grey device the size of a domino that Chen had sent her. It was a high-speed cloner. A tiny red light on the device blinked, then turned green. It had copied the fob's unique cryptographic signature. She clipped the original fob back onto the keychain, closed the locker, spun the tumblers, and walked out. The entire operation took less than 90 seconds. She was back in the apartment before Julian had even finished his protein shake. That night, she relayed the success to Chen. "Excellent, Miss Vance," he said, his voice humming with satisfaction. "With this, our technicians can replicate the key's algorithm. We will have a window into the Citadel. Now, what is his current obsession?" "Something called the Helios Project," she replied instantly. Julian had been consumed by it for months. It's a massive hostile takeover of a clean energy company, Solara Innovations. He's been secretly accumulating their stock through a dozen shell corporations. He plans to announce the takeover in a month. He says it will be his masterpiece, the deal that makes him a legend. "Hostile takeovers are bloody affairs," Chen noted. "They require powerful allies." "Who are his partners?" Elara closed her eyes, dredging her memory. "He's financing it with a massive loan from a private consortium in Dubai, led by a Sheikh Al-Thani. And his key Wall Street ally is a man named Marcus Thorne at Goldman Sachs. They handle the brokerage side." "Marcus Thorne," Chen repeated slowly. "We know him. A man with expensive tastes and a penchant for gambling on sporting events. A potential vulnerability. Over the next 2 weeks, the Odysseus Trust became a ghost in Julian's machine." Using the cloned key, Chen's team in Geneva slipped in and out of the Citadel server, silent and undetected. They were digital specters, copying files, mapping networks, and tracing the labyrinthine flow of money that propped up the Croft Empire. Elara became the human intelligence. She paid close attention to Julian's moods. She knew when a particular shell company was facing a regulatory hurdle by the tension in his jaw. She knew when a wire transfer was imminent by the way he paced the living room, barking orders into his phone. She would feed these scraps of information, a name, a date, a bank, to Chen, who would weave them into a larger tapestry of financial intelligence. The trust began its attack not with a cannonball, but with 1,000 tiny cuts. An anonymous tip was sent to a German financial regulator about irregularities in a Frankfurt-based shell company, one of the key vehicles for the Solara stock acquisition. The company's assets were frozen pending an investigation tying up hundreds of millions of Julian's capital. He was enraged, blaming German inefficiency, never suspecting the source. Next, a carefully curated dossier detailing Marcus Thorne's undeclared gambling debts was leaked to the compliance department at Goldman Sachs. Thorne was quietly and swiftly removed from his position, severing Julian's primary artery into the Wall Street trading floors. Julian was furious, cursing Thorne's stupidity and recklessness. Then Chen's team, armed with the knowledge of Julian's private ledgers, began a coordinated and anonymous short-selling campaign against Croft Consolidated's publicly traded bonds. They knew exactly where the company was over-leveraged, where the debt covenants were weakest. The bond yields began to spike, making it more expensive for Julian to borrow money. He saw it as market volatility, a reaction to rising interest rates, a sign of rival firms smelling blood. He never once looked at his own home. He grew more volatile, more paranoid. One evening, a priceless Ming vase he had bought at a Sotheby's auction was knocked over and shattered by a maid. Julian flew into an incandescent rage, firing her on the spot and screaming about incompetence. He was a king whose castle was being mysteriously undermined, and so he reinforced the walls, becoming even more of a tyrant to those within his immediate grasp. Elara watched him, her face a mask of sympathy, her heart a block of ice. She would soothe him, bringing him a glass of water, murmuring placating words. He would grab her arm, his grip too tight, his eyes wild. "They're coming for me, Alara. All of them. Petrov, the Chinese. They want to tear down what I've built. But I won't let them." "Of course not, darling," she would whisper. "You're too smart for them." That night, in the sterile silence of the guest bathroom, she logged on for her call with Chen. "He's feeling the pressure," she reported. "He's becoming unstable." "Good," Chen replied. "The foundations are saturated. The structure is weak. It's time to prepare for the final stroke. The Helios project is his pride. We will turn it into his guillotine." Alara looked at her own reflection in the dark screen of the laptop. Her face was pale, her eyes large and shadowed, but there was a hardness in them that hadn't been there before. She was no longer just a victim. She was an instrument of justice, a quiet, patient force of destruction. Julian had tried to freeze her out, to render her powerless. Instead, he had unleashed a power he couldn't comprehend, a ghost forged by a grandfather's love and a husband's cruelty. The first visible tremor struck on a Monday morning. Julian was in his home office, a space he called the cockpit. He was on a conference call with his legal team, finalizing the last details before launching his hostile bid for Solara Innovations. He was arrogant, imperious, and completely in his element. Alara was in the kitchen, ostensibly overseeing the preparation of her morning smoothie, but in reality, she was listening. The kitchen was directly below the office, and a discreet baby monitor intended for the nursery was currently tucked behind a potted orchid, broadcasting the audio from Julian's office to a small receiver she kept in her pocket. It was a trick Chen's team had suggested, a low-tech solution to a high-tech problem. "The financing from Dubai is secure." Julian was saying, his voice booming with confidence. "Sheikh Al-Thani's consortium is wiring the final tranche today. Once it lands, we file the 13D with the SEC and go public. Solara's board won't know what hit them." Suddenly, the triumphant tone vanished. "What? What do you mean, there's a delay?" A pause. Alara held her breath. "What compliance flag? It's a standard wire transfer. Get the bankers on the phone. Get Al-Thani on the phone. I don't care what time it is, in Dubai, you wake him up." The call ended abruptly. A heavy silence followed, then the distinct, sharp sound of a crystal glass being smashed against a wall. Alara flinched, but kept her expression serene as the chef glanced nervously in her direction. 2 hours later, Julian stormed out of his office, his face ashen. He bypassed Alara completely, not even registering her presence as he stalked towards the bedroom, dialing his phone. "Get me Mikhail Petrov's private number," he snarled at his assistant. "Now." Alara knew what had happened. Chen had warned her this was coming. The Odysseus Trust, through another anonymous tip, had alerted the U.S. Treasury's Office of Foreign Assets Control, OFAC, to a potential violation in the Dubai transaction. The tip suggested, with impeccably forged evidence, that a small percentage of the consortium's funds could be traced back to a sanctioned Russian oligarch, a man named Mikhail Petrov, Julian's #1 rival. The wire transfer wasn't just delayed. It was frozen solid, tangled in a web of international anti-money laundering regulations that would take months, if not years, to unravel. The fuel for the Helios project had been cut off at the source. Julian's paranoia, which had been simmering for weeks, now boiled over. He was convinced this was a direct attack from Petrov. He saw his rival's hand in everything the German investigation, Marcus Thorne's downfall, the pressure on his bonds. It was a classic corporate raid, and he was blind to the true enemy. His ego simply couldn't conceive of an attack coming from anywhere but a competing titan. The idea that it could originate from the silent, pregnant woman padding around his apartment was beyond the realm of his imagination. His tyranny in the penthouse intensified. He had the entire apartment swept for listening devices, a team of ex-Mossad security consultants marching through their home. They found nothing, of course. Elara's tools were too sophisticated, and the baby monitor was too innocuous. The failure to find a bug only made him more certain he was dealing with a genius adversary. He started locking the door to his office. He began taking important calls in his car, driving aimlessly through Manhattan for hours. His relationship with Elara became a twisted caricature of concern. He would question her constantly, not about her well-being, but about her conversations. "Did your mother call today? What did she say? Did you talk to your friends? Who were they? What did you talk about?" He would demand, his eyes boring into her. He suspected everyone around him of being a potential leak. Elara played her part to perfection. She seemed frightened by his outbursts, confused by his questions. She cried easily. "Julian, you're scaring me. I don't know anything about your business. I just want our baby to be healthy." Her apparent fragility and ignorance were her shield. The more he descended into a paranoid hell of his own, making the more invisible she became to him as a threat. Meanwhile, the real work was accelerating. With Julian's capital tied up and his primary acquisition strategy in ruins, the Odysseus Trust moved from defense to offense. Chen's team had discovered Julian's Plan B for the Helios project. Buried deep within the Citadel server was a file labeled Project Chimera. It was a contingency plan to fund the takeover using capital siphoned from the pension fund of a manufacturing company Croft Consolidated had acquired 3 years prior. It was illegal, a blatant violation of ERISA regulations, and an act of corporate malfeasance so profound it could lead to prison time. "This is the kill shot," Miss Vance Chen told her during one of their nightly calls, "but we need unequivocal proof that he and he alone authorized this. A digital file can be disavowed. We need his signature on a physical document or a voice recording." Elara's blood ran cold. This was a new level of risk. He keeps all sensitive documents in the office safe. It's biometric. Only his thumbprint can open it. "Then we must find a way to get inside that office," Chen stated simply. The opportunity came in a way Elara could never have predicted. One afternoon, Julian, increasingly erratic and sleep-deprived, confronted her in the living room. He had a printout in his hand, a log of all incoming calls to the penthouse landline. "Who is AV Deliveries?" he demanded, stabbing a finger at the entry from 3 weeks ago. They called the day before the German investigation started. "Who are they?" Elara's heart stopped. She had been so careful, but she couldn't control the building's call logs. She feigned ignorance, her mind racing. "AV, I don't know, Julian. A flower delivery. Perhaps. I get so many things I can't remember." "Don't lie to me," he roared, his face contorted with rage. He was a cornered animal lashing out at shadows. Everything is connected. It's all part of Petrov's plan. In his fury, he swept a lamp off an end table. It crashed to the floor. As he turned, he stumbled over the wreckage, his arm flailing out to break his fall. He cried out in pain, clutching his right wrist. It was an ugly, unnatural angle. He had broken it. Chaos erupted. His assistant was called. An orthopedic specialist was summoned for an emergency house call. In the frantic shuffle as Julian was sedated for the pain and his arm was set in a heavy cast, Elara saw her chance. His right arm, his dominant arm, his key to the biometric safe, was incapacitated. That night, as Julian slept a deep, drugged sleep in their bed, his arm propped up on a pillow, Elara slipped into his office. The room was dark, the city lights painting stripes across the floor. She approached the safe, which was hidden behind a minimalist painting. She knew she couldn't open it, but she didn't need to. Chen had anticipated this possibility. He had instructed her on what to look for: a digital recorder no bigger than a pen that Julian used to dictate memos. He was too vain to be seen wearing his reading glasses to type everything. Elara found it on his desk, right next to his blotter. She turned it on and scrolled through the audio files. They were mostly mundane: memo to legal note to self, call the Hamptons landscaper. And then she found it. A file created 2 weeks ago. The title was simply Chimera Contingency. She put the recorder to her ear, her hand trembling as she pressed play. Julian's voice filled the silence, crisp and clear. Note to file. Project Chimera. In the event of a failure of the primary financing tranche for the Helios acquisition, I am authorizing the leveraging of surplus assets from the Midwest Manufacturing Pension Fund as detailed in the attached prospectus. This is a temporary bridge loan to be repaid post-acquisition. The risk is minimal, the reward is total. This authorization is mine and mine alone. End note. It was everything. The smoking gun. A confession in his own voice. She connected the recorder to the secure laptop using a tiny cable. The file transferred in seconds. She sent it immediately to Chen. Then she wiped the connection log from the laptop, placed the recorder exactly where she had found it, and slipped out of the office, leaving no trace. Back in the guest bathroom, she received a one-word message from Chen on the encrypted chat checkmate. A wave of relief and terror washed over her. The final piece was in place. She walked to the window of the guest room and looked out at the city and cool. It was no longer a glittering prison. It was a kingdom about to fall. The cracks in the facade were about to become a catastrophic collapse, and she was the one holding the detonator. The end came not with a bang, but with the quiet, devastating efficiency of a perfectly executed plan. It was a Wednesday morning, exactly 1 month after Elara's cards had been declined. Julian, his arm in a black sling, and his mood fouler than ever, was on the phone with his bankers trying to salvage the Helios deal through sheer force of will. He was trying to arrange a new, punishingly expensive line of credit from a hedge fund in Connecticut, a move of pure desperation. Elara sat in the living room, ostensibly reading a book on child development. On her lap, hidden beneath the book, was the secure satellite phone displaying a live encrypted feed from Chen. The message on the screen read, Phase 1 initiated, 9:30 a.m. EST. Stand by. At precisely 9:30 a.m., an email was sent from an untraceable encrypted server in Estonia to a select group of people. The recipients included the lead enforcement attorney at the Securities and Exchange Commission, SEC, the head of the Department of Labor's Pension Oversight Division, and most devastatingly, a Pulitzer Prize-winning investigative journalist at the Wall Street Journal named David Chenier, known for his relentless exposés of corporate fraud. The email was brief and anonymous. It contained a single password-protected attachment. The password was legacy. Inside the attachment was the complete damning story of Project Chimera. There were the internal memos from the Citadel server, The secret prospectuses, the falsified actuarial reports, and the labyrinthine charts showing the planned diversion of pension funds. And at the heart of it all was the audiophile Julian Croft, in his own voice, authorizing the illegal act. Elara watched Julian through the open doorway of the living room. She saw the exact moment the world shifted. His phone buzzed with an incoming call. He looked at the caller ID, and his face tightened. It was his chief legal counsel. "What is it, Robert?" he snapped. A long pause. "What do you mean? What have I done?" "The journal." "What about the journal?" His face went from pale to ghostly white. He stumbled over to the bank of monitors in his office, his good hand flying across the keyboard. He brought up the Wall Street Journal's website. The headline was just being pushed to the front page. Croft Consolidated, implicated in pension raid scheme. SEC launches, urgent probe. Leaked audio reveals billionaire. Julian Croft's voice. "No," he whispered. It was a strangled, broken sound. "No, no, no." His phone began to ring incessantly. Then his other lines, a cacophony of incoming calls, each one another nail in his coffin. The hedge fund in Connecticut, his terrified board members, his PR team. Chen's feed on Elara's phone updated Phase 2 initiated. Trading halt requested. On the financial news network, playing silently on a nearby television, a red banner flashed across the bottom of the screen. Trading in Croft Consolidated. CFCN. Halted pending news. The fortress had been breached. The ghost in the machine had revealed itself. Julian was a man unraveling in real time. He swept a monitor off his desk, sending it crashing to the floor. He kicked his chair over. He was roaring a primal scream of disbelief and fury. Petrov. It was Petrov. That son of a bitch. He still didn't see it. His colossal ego was his final blind spot. He was so busy looking for an enemy on his own level that he never thought to look down. Elara calmly placed her book and the phone on the couch, stood up, and walked to the threshold of his office. He looked up at her, his eyes wet and bloodshot, searching for something, an ally, an anchor. "Elara," he gasped. "They're destroying me. Everything. It's all gone." She looked at him, her expression not of pity, but of cold, clear judgment. She felt nothing. The fear, the love, the subservience, it had all been burned away, leaving only the hard, clean truth of their relationship. "Yes," she said, her voice even. "They are." Something in her tone, in her stillness, finally pierced his paranoid fog. A new dawning horror crept into his eyes. He looked at her truly, looked at her for the first time in years. He saw not the docile wife, but a stranger, a woman with secrets. The call. He whispered, his mind finally making the connection. The call log. AV deliveries. He pieced it together, the letters clicking into place. AV. Arthur Vance. Elara didn't need to confirm it. Her silence was his answer. He stared at her, his mouth agape. The scale of the deception was too vast for him to comprehend. The obedient wife, the beautiful accessory, the vessel for his legacy. She was the architect of his apocalypse. "You," he breathed the word full of utter disbelief. "It was you, all of it." How Elara walked over to his desk, to the one spot he had cleared in his rage. She placed a single sheet of paper upon the polished wood. It was the only piece of physical evidence she had allowed herself. It was a statement she had requested from Chen that morning, a statement for the Odysseus Trust. It showed no account numbers, no incriminating details. It just showed the trust's name, her name, as the sole beneficiary, and its current market value, a staggering figure that was nearly double what Julian's empire had been worth at its peak. And at the bottom, there was a single-line item under the heading Recent Strategic Allocations, Short Position, Croft Consolidated, CFCN. Julian's eyes scanned the paper. He saw the name. He saw the valuation. And he saw the final brutal checkmate. She hadn't just exposed him. She had bet against him. She had profited from his downfall. The Odysseus Trust had shorted his company into oblivion, and in doing so its own value had skyrocketed. He looked from the paper to her face. The man who controlled everything had controlled nothing. The master of the universe had been undone by a ghost from the past, and a woman he had fatally underestimated. He didn't shout. He didn't rage. All the fight went out of him, replaced by a hollow, echoing emptiness. He slowly sank into his remaining chair, a ruined king on a broken throne. Just then the penthouse doorbell rang, a loud, insistent official sound. Elara walked past Julian without another glance. She went to the front door and opened it. 2 men and 1 woman in dark, conservative suits stood in the hallway. The man in the middle held up his credentials. "SEC enforcement," he said grimly. "We have a warrant to seize all documents and electronic devices belonging to Julian Croft." Behind them, the elevator doors opened and 2 uniformed NYPD officers stepped out. Elara stepped aside, holding the door open for them. "He's in his office," she said calmly. "I believe you'll find everything you need." She walked away, not looking back as they swarmed into her home, into Julian's life. She went to her bedroom and picked up a single, packed suitcase that had been waiting in her closet. It contained a few changes of clothes, the secure laptop, and the leather folio her grandfather had given her. It was all she needed. As she walked to the service elevator, she could hear the lead agent reading Julian his rights. His voice was a monotone drone, the final dreary rites for a fallen empire. The sound faded as the elevator doors closed, carrying her down and away, out of the gilded cage, and into the rest of her life. 1 year later. The air in the old stone house didn't smell of white tea and lilies. It smelled of lavender from the fields outside, damp earth after a rain shower, and honey from the wax of old polished wood. The house, a beautifully restored 18th century mass nestled in the hills of Provence, France, was the antithesis of the Fifth Avenue penthouse. It was solid-rooted and quiet. Elara sat on a worn linen sofa, a book lying open in her lap. Sunlight streamed through the French doors, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air. The only sound was the gentle cooing of her son, sleeping peacefully in a simple wooden bassinet beside her. She had named him Arthur. He was a beautiful, healthy baby, with her dark hair, and she was certain her grandfather's calm, observant blue eyes. He was not a legacy or an heir to a financial dynasty. He was simply her son, and her love for him was a fierce, quiet, and boundless thing. The past year had been one of careful, deliberate reconstruction. Guided by Alastair Chen, she had vanished from the New York social scene as completely as a ship slipping over the horizon. The Odysseus Trust had performed its final act on her behalf. It had anonymously bought out the remnants of Croft Consolidated for pennies on the dollar during the bankruptcy proceedings. The purchase included several of the company's legitimate assets, including the now liberated Solara Innovations. Elara, as the trust's beneficiary, had become the silent majority owner of a burgeoning clean energy company. She had installed a new ethical board of directors led by the brilliant female engineer who had originally founded Solara before Julian's predatory attack. The company was thriving this time with a mission that went beyond shareholder value. She didn't live the life of a billionaire. The ostentatious wealth Julian had craved now felt vulgar to her. She had sold the penthouse, the Hamptons estate, the diamonds, the cars. The proceeds, along with a significant portion of the trust's capital, were funneled into a new entity she had created, the Vance Foundation, dedicated to funding legal aid for women in coercive relationships and investing in female-led startups. Her grandfather's weapon had been transformed into a tool for creation. Of Julian, she heard only sporadic, grim news through Chen. His fall had been absolute. Stripped of his wealth, buried in lawsuits from shareholders and the government, he was a pariah. The SEC had barred him from the securities industry for life. The Department of Labor's case regarding the pension fund was proceeding to a criminal trial, and a conviction seemed certain. His powerful friends had abandoned him instantly. His name, once a synonym for success, was now a cautionary tale whispered on Wall Street. One afternoon, Chen forwarded her an article from a New York tabloid. It featured a recent grainy photograph of Julian. He was leaving a courthouse, no longer in his bespoke suits, but in an ill-fitting off-the-rack one. He looked haggard, gaunt, and a decade older. The arrogance was gone, replaced by a hunted, haunted look in his eyes. The headline was cruel and concise. Broken the fall of Julian Croft. Elara looked at the photo for a long moment, felt a flicker of something, not pity, but a profound sadness for the man he could have been, and then deleted the message. He was a chapter she had finished reading. Her life was now defined by small, tangible joys. The weight of Arthur in her arms, the taste of fresh bread from the village boulangerie. A walk through the lavender fields as the sun set, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. She was not the imprisoned Mrs. Croft, or even the vengeful Elara Vance. She was just Elara, a mother, a quiet businesswoman, a woman who had fought her way out of the dark and into the light. She looked down at her sleeping son. She would tell him the story one day, not the story of revenge, but the story of resilience. She would tell him about his great-grandfather, Arthur Vance, a man who understood that true strength was not about controlling others, but about ensuring the freedom of those you love. She would teach him that a legacy isn't built with steel and glass and leveraged buyouts, but with integrity, courage, and purpose. A warm breeze drifted in through the open doors, carrying the scent of a future that was entirely her own. She had been trapped, penniless, and pregnant. Now she was free, powerful, and a mother. Julian Croft had tried to destroy her, but in doing so he had inadvertently forged her into the woman she was always meant to become, and that she knew was the greatest victory of all. Elara's story is a chilling reminder that the most opulent cages are still cages. It's a story of how devastatingly a powerful man can underestimate a woman, and how intelligence and hidden strength can become the ultimate weapons. It isn't just about revenge. It's about reclaiming a narrative, securing a future, and turning the tools of oppression into instruments of liberation. The battle between new money arrogance and old money cunning played out not on a trading floor, but in the heart of a marriage with a child's future hanging in the balance. If you found this story of resilience and strategic genius as compelling as we did, please hit that like button to show your support. Share it with someone who loves a story of epic karma And make sure you subscribe to our channel and turn on notifications so you don't miss our next deep dive into real-life drama. What part of Ilara's plan impressed you the most? Let us know in the comments below.